The sun beat down mercilessly as Susan stared across the immaculate lawn dividing her property from the Wilsons. Karen Wilson, the neighborhood's self-appointed HOA dictator, stood on the sidewalk, arms crossed, glaring daggers in Susan's direction. "Your weeds are out of control, Susan. This is unacceptable. You have 48 hours to fix this eyesore before we fine you." Karen's shrill voice carried across the manicured expanse. Susan gripped the hose in her hand, knuckles whitening. "The drought has been hard on everyone's yards, Karen. I'm doing my best." "Your best isn't good enough," Karen snapped. "This is a premier neighborhood, and we have standards to uphold." She sneered, eyes narrowing. "If you can't keep up, maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable." Susan's jaw tightened. "I'm not going anywhere. This is my home." Karen's lips curled into a malicious smile. "We'll see about that." She turned on her heel and marched back to her spotless property, the heels of her designer shoes clicking against the pavement. Susan watched her go, rage bubbling in her chest. This wasn't the first time Karen had targeted her, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. The woman was relentless in her quest to maintain her vision of neighborhood perfection, no matter who she had to steamroll in the process. Sighing, Susan began to water her struggling lawn, trying to ignore the familiar sting of tears in her eyes. She had poured her heart and soul into this home, and she'd be damned if she was going to let Karen and the HOA take it from her. As the water sprayed across the dry grass, a plan began to form in Susan's mind. Maybe it was time to fight fire with fire. If Karen wanted to play hardball, then so be it. The next morning, Susan woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She made a beeline for the garage, rummaging through the cluttered shelves until she found what she was looking for: a small, battered toolbox. Carrying it back into the house, she carefully opened the lid, revealing an array of old pipes, fittings, and tools. This was the remnant of her late husband's plumbing business, a relic from a life they'd once shared. Susan ran her fingers over the familiar tools, a bittersweet pang in her chest. John had always been the one to handle the septic system maintenance, but she remembered watching him work, learning the ins and outs of the system. With a deep breath, she steeled herself and headed out to the backyard, the toolbox in hand. Locating the septic tank's access hatch, she quickly got to work, removing the heavy cover and peering down into the murky depths. The smell was overwhelming, but Susan pushed through the discomfort, methodically checking the various components and ensuring everything was functioning properly. As she worked, a plan began to take shape in her mind, a plan that would give Karen a taste of her own medicine. Once she was satisfied with the system's condition, Susan returned to the house, a grim determination etched on her face. It was time to put her plan into action. Later that day, Susan watched from her kitchen window as Karen strode down the sidewalk, heading straight for her property. The HOA president's expression was thunderous, her fists clenched at her sides. Taking a deep breath, Susan opened the back door and stepped outside, a cool glass of water in her hand. "Karen," she called out, feigning surprise. "What brings you by?" Karen's eyes narrowed as she approached. "You know damn well why I'm here, Susan. Your lawn is still a disaster." Susan offered a conciliatory smile. "I'm sorry, Karen. I've been doing my best to water it, but the drought has been tough." She held out the glass of water. "Here, have a drink. It's just water, but it might help you cool down a bit." For a moment, Karen seemed taken aback by the gesture. Then, her lips curled into a sneer. "I don't want your water, Susan. I want you to fix your yard, or I'll have no choice but to fine you." "Are you sure?" Susan pressed, holding the glass a little closer. "It's very refreshing." Karen eyed the water suspiciously. "I said I don't want it." She turned to leave, but Susan's next words stopped her in her tracks. "It's not just water, you know. It's from my septic tank." Karen froze, her face twisting in a mixture of horror and disbelief. "What did you just say?" Susan held the glass steady, a triumphant glint in her eye. "You heard me. This water comes straight from my septic tank. Go ahead, take a sip." Karen's eyes darted between the glass and Susan's unwavering gaze. "You're bluffing," she stammered. "There's no way you'd do something so disgusting." "Oh, but I would," Susan replied, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You see, I've been having some trouble with my septic system lately, and I wouldn't want it to, overflow or anything. Especially not onto your precious lawn." Karen's face paled, and she took a step back. "You can't do this. It's illegal." Susan shrugged. "Maybe, but I'm sure the fines the HOA would levy against me would be nothing compared to the cost of cleaning up a septic spill on your property." She extended the glass a little further. "So, how about that drink?" Karen's eyes narrowed, and she opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She stood there, frozen, her entire body trembling with a mix of fury and revulsion. The tension hung thick in the air as the two women stared each other down, neither willing to back down. Finally, Karen broke the silence, her voice shaking with barely contained rage. "You think you can threaten me and get away with it, Susan? Well, you're wrong. I'm going to make your life a living hell." Susan met her gaze, unflinching. "I'd be careful if I were you, Karen. One wrong move, and your precious lawn could be swimming in a whole lot of sewage." Karen's nostrils flared, and for a moment, Susan thought the other woman might actually lunge at her. But then, with a visible effort, Karen composed herself, smoothing a hand over her immaculate hair. "This isn't over, Susan," she spat. "You'll regret the day you crossed me." With that, she turned on her heel and stalked back to her own property, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Susan watched her go, a sense of grim satisfaction settling in her chest. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but the thought of finally putting Karen in her place was too tempting to resist. As she headed back inside, she couldn't help but wonder what the HOA president would do next. But whatever it was, Susan was ready. She'd faced down Karen's bullying tactics before, and she wasn't about to back down now. The following days were tense, with Karen's glares and thinly veiled threats a constant presence in Susan's life. The HOA president seemed to be biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Susan, for her part, remained vigilant, keeping a close eye on her septic system and ensuring it was functioning properly. She knew that any misstep on her part could be disastrous, and she wasn't about to give Karen the upper hand. One afternoon, as Susan was tending to her neglected garden, the sound of a car pulling into her driveway caught her attention. Glancing up, she felt her heart sink as she recognized the vehicle. It was the local code enforcement officer, a staunch ally of Karen's. Susan hurried to the front of the house, her hands trembling slightly. She watched as the officer approached, a grim expression on his face. "Ma'am, I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of your property," he announced, his tone brooking no argument. Susan swallowed hard, her mind racing. "Of course, officer. What seems to be the problem?" "Apparently, there have been some complaints about the condition of your yard," the officer replied, his eyes scanning the property. "I'm here to assess the situation and determine if any violations have been committed." Susan felt a surge of panic, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I see. Well, I've been doing my best to maintain the lawn, but the drought has made it quite challenging." The officer nodded, his expression unreadable. "I'll need to take a closer look. If you don't mind, I'd like to inspect your septic system as well." Susan's heart pounded in her chest as the officer approached the septic tank access hatch. She watched, her mouth dry, as he lifted the heavy cover and peered down into the murky depths. Everything seems to be in order," the officer murmured, his brow furrowed in concentration. Susan held her breath, praying that her plan had worked and that the septic system was functioning properly. If the officer discovered any irregularities, it could spell disaster for her. After a few tense moments, The officer straightened up and turned to face Susan, his expression unreadable. "Well, I don't see any immediate concerns with your septic system," he said, his voice level. "However, I do have some issues with the overall condition of your yard." Susan felt a wave of relief wash over her, but she quickly composed herself, bracing for the inevitable bad news. "What kind of issues?" she asked, her voice calm and measured. "There are a number of weeds and overgrown areas that need to be addressed," the officer replied, his gaze sweeping across the lawn. "I'm afraid I'll have to issue you a citation for failure to maintain your property in accordance with the HOA guidelines." Susan nodded, her jaw set in a determined line. "I understand. I'll make sure to address the issues as soon as possible." The officer gave her a curt nod and turned to leave, but not before casting one last, inscrutable glance in her direction. As the code enforcement officer's car disappeared down the street, Susan felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. While she had managed to avoid any immediate disaster with her septic system, the citation was a clear warning shot from Karen and the HOA. She knew that the battle was far from over, and that Karen would not be satisfied until she had broken Susan's spirit and forced her out of the neighborhood. But Susan was determined to stand her ground. Heading back inside, she began to make a list of the necessary yard work that needed to be done. She would have to put in long hours, but she was willing to do whatever it took to keep her home. As she worked, Susan couldn't help but wonder what Karen's next move would be. Would the HOA president try to escalate the situation further, perhaps with legal action or even physical confrontation? The thought sent a shiver down Susan's spine, but she refused to let fear paralyze her. Instead, she drew strength from the memories of her late husband, John, and the countless battles they had faced together over the years. If he were here, she knew he would have encouraged her to stand up to the HOA's bullying tactics, to fight for what was rightfully hers. With a renewed sense of purpose, Susan set to work, determined to show Karen and the rest of the HOA that she was not to be trifled with. This was her home, and she would do whatever it took to defend it. The conflict between Susan and Karen was far from over, but in that moment, Susan felt a glimmer of hope. She knew that the road ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to face whatever challenges came her way, one step at a time.